Okay. I'm going to take a look at the awful green things from outer space, or as my friend Clueless Dave would have put it, little green things. Most of the games I cover, most of them really these days have been first looks. This is, some of them, maybe I played a few times. This is one I actually have gotten a decent amount of plays in throughout my life. And I'm quite fond of it. It's got its potential issues, but it's a really, really cute drawings. The Tom Wham style here for the artwork. And one of a couple Tom Wham games that I think he really did a great job on the gameplay itself. This one just really works well. Now, let's take a look at what the rules are like. I'm not going to go into full details on these, I don't think, because I'm not sure I really know them that well. I didn't bother reading the rules. I'm doing this as kind of a quick interlude while I'm working my way through clipping and reading Virgin Queen. But I figured this would be fairly easy to handle, and it's something I've wanted to get out for a while. Okay. Now this is the Steve Jackson version, apparently the first version. I probably had heard this before but forgot it. Probably the first version came out in Dragon Magazine, as did most, if not all, Tom Wham games of that era. But a few of them got republished, and thankfully this one did, because otherwise it would be hard to get, and it's actually gone through a couple of publications. I see it's got a deluxe box. Personally, I like this little box better. I can put this in my pocket and, you know, go to a coffee shop with it, and it's no big deal. Well, big pocket, but still. All right, so let's take a look at what the counters have. They have, the characters have 3 numbers on them. And the top number up here is their movement allowance. That's basically how many areas they can walk through. This is how many dice they're allowed to attack with. And then this is how many hit points they have. To kill or hurt in some way a critter, crew member, or a little green thing, you have to equal or exceed its hit points, or constitution as they will put it here. Alright. There's some variance to set up. Basically, the crew gets to start in a number of different locations with slight limitations on it. This is pretty much my preferred setup, and I kind of feel like anything too far from this, you might be able to swap things around. So, for example, you can put pilots here in the pool room instead of the Marines. I usually always end up playing the Marines in there because they look cooler with baseball bats. Although they don't really need a weapon. They have a couple dice for attacks, whereas the pilots don't. But the pilots have good speed, and there's interesting weapons I want to collect. At the very least, I want one to grab the sensor, and I couldn't see a pilot playing with a Marine because he'd probably get his brains bashed in or something. Alright, so now, after you do that, after you set up your crew, which I've done, you're going to roll a couple of dice to see where the monsters start and what you start with. Yeah, they'll be starting in from a specific place, and I'm not going to do that yet. I'll do that when I start playing. And then they get to expand from there, 1 monster per area, and they can't be in any areas that have crew members in them. Okay. Then after all the monsters are on the board, the crew's going to get this special move up to 2 crew members, but they can't pick up any weapons or anything to try to run into a monster, and that'll set the alarm off. They're allowed to attack the monsters initially using their hand-to-hand value, which is just their normal combat dice. For each turn, you get the sequence of play, which is also copied here on the map. The monsters will go first after that special alert phase, and what happens with the monsters is the monster player gets to pick 1 set of monsters, and there's 4 different types. There's fragments, which you can't start the game with, but you can get them through the use of weapons. There's eggs, which are immobile, have no dice, They take very little damage. There's these baby monsters who have a couple dice and are slow. And then there's the full-grown monster who has a decent number of dice, more than any crew member except for the robot, for whom there are all kind of special rules. And they have a decent amount of hit points, not as much as the heavier crew members. Anyway, there's going to be an assortment of the latter three type, no fragments at the beginning of the game. And the monster can pick one of these categories to grow. If he picks eggs, they hatch and they turn into babies. If he picks fragments, they turn into babies. If he picks babies, they turn into adults. If he picks adults, they lay an egg each. If you don't have the counter mix to cover all the things you're supposed to grow, too bad, you don't grow those things. Then he's allowed to move, and for the most part, movement is simply area to area, one per movement point, with the exception that if you move into an area with an enemy character, you have to kind of stop. Then we go to the attack phase. In the attack phase, the base idea of attacking, and what the green things always use, is you pick somebody in your same area. Well, you allocate all your monster's dice to attack on specific crew members. Or, in the case of the crew, you pick your crew members' dice to attack. But the crew have some special abilities based on, well, not on that, but based on the different weapons that might be kicking around. All of which have their own little special rules, basically. Okay. So you will assign all the monsters who are attacking all the crew in any given area, one area at a time. And then you roll the dice. And likewise, you'll do the same with the crew when it comes to their turn. But each player gets to attack just on their own turn, and you might end up rolling a bunch of dice. In fact, you know, to kill Captain Yid, you need 27 points of damage. And you need to get that all in one turn attack phase. So, well, let's say you average 3.5 on each six-sided die. 27's divided by 3.5. Well, 27 divided by 3 is 9. So, let's see. 8 times 3.5 is 24, 28. That should work. So 8 dice would, on average, take Captain Yid out. So maybe two adults would be a good attack on him. On some of the on the lesser crew members, it's easier to hit them. So, you know, somebody with only 12 hits, well, 4 dice you might get away with. 6 you probably will, you know? And you've got to figure these odds out, and it's pretty easy. If you don't do enough damage, you do nothing. If you succeed in doing as many hits as their constitution, the base rule is you kill them. If you're a crew member, the monster goes in the pool. If you're a monster killing a crew member, the crew member's just dead. Now, again, though, the crew members have these special weapons that have special abilities. All right, and then you have this wake-up phase. It's possible that some things, due to the weapons, will become stunned. And if they become stunned, well, at the end of that player's turn, they flip back over. Basically, when you're stunned, you're flipped over. That's kind of unpleasant because you can't see what's on the back. You can't even tell whose it is. I might want to color code these counters so that I can tell at least that, but I haven't done that. All right. That's the base flavor of the game. But the crew has a little bit of difference. First of all, they can't grow. But if they start the turn in the same space as a weapon, or if 2 crew members are in the same space and one of them has a weapon, or both of them have weapons, they can kind of exchange those weapons or pick up weapons that they see on the ground. Some weapons, all the weapons start out with unknown abilities. Now, at some point or another in the game, you might decide some of these weapons just suck, and you don't ever want to use them, and you can just discard them from the game to make things easier on yourself, because the monsters can't use the weapons, and there's no way to force the crew to use them. I don't know if that's covered in the rules particularly, but it can remove some of the clutter from the board. So the crew picks up weapons, and there's one special weapon, the electric fence. I'm not going to go into too much detail about it, and it's not a very effective weapon, but it's got very specific rules where you have to set it up and turn it on, and it takes actions to do that. And I think there's specific questions about it on Board Game Geek that you can look it up if you need to look at it. But anyway, you pick up these weapons, then you move just like the monsters do. You attack. The difference in the attack is you might have some ranged weapons, and that some of the ranged weapons will be able to go into an adjacent space. Some of them will be able to go down a line of sight type corridor, so you could shoot from here down to here as long as you're not going through two doors, because you're peeking through one door and firing around the corner or whatever. Okay, all pretty simple so far. No stacking limit. If monsters attack and kill a crew member, the group of monsters that attacked that crew member gets a special grow phase. So they're able, but only for one of the monsters that succeeded in killing them. Basically, they're eating the crew member. One special rule involves the robot. In fact, if the robot is in the space with monsters, all the monsters must attack the robot. And if they kill the robot, one of them must eat the robot. If he eats the robot, a random weapons effect takes effect on that monster. Which could be good, could be bad. It depends. Alright. The weapons have some special abilities. Let's look down the order. There's the bottle of acid, which is found over here in the science lab. And its special ability is you can chuck it. I think that means you can throw it one space. You can also use it in the same area as the guy's, as your crew member is in. He can just kind of throw it or break it over the monster's head or whatever. Let me explain how all the weapons work in general. The first time you see a weapon, you gotta draw a counter to see what it does to the monsters. And for example, this one would do 3 dice to kill. And that is better than what most of the crew members can do. There are a number of different abilities, though, there. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. There are ones that allow monsters to grow. You probably never want to use that on a monster. There's others that'll make the monsters shrink. There's ones that'll stun the monsters. And finally, the scariest of all, perhaps, because it sometimes is useful, is there's one that allows that turns monsters into fragments. And you roll a die for each monster that's affected by that weapon, and that's usually going to be 1. Like if I throw a bottle of acid, I'm only hitting 1 monster. But there's some things like the can of rocket fuel that can hit multiple monsters at once. If I'm hitting 1 monster, I roll a die, and that many fragments occur from the monster. Now, in some cases, that works perfectly fine. For example, if I'm fragmenting monsters that I want to shrink, that's great. But if I'm fragmenting and there aren't a lot of fragments left, I could end up killing the monster because there are no fragments to take. But in general, rolling a die worth of fragments, unless it's an adult monster, I'm going to get on average more yuck than I started out with. So that tends to be a very, very dangerous thing to play with. And that's probably the scariest of all the weapons out there, although a mass effect grow weapon could be bad. Let's take a look at some of the others. Canister of squirts. This works pretty much like the bottle of acid. You can throw it. The communication beamer. This is a little different. So this is your first area of effect weapon. Whatever area you aim it at, it affects all the monsters in that area. Okay? And it's also line of sight, which means I can fire it from here all the way down this corridor into any one of these 3 areas. Nothing blocks the line of sight except doorways, I believe. Okay, I'll look that up real quick. Let me make sure that I can shoot. Yeah, it's not blocked by intervening creatures. So, immediately you're probably saying, oh wow, what happens if I fire 2 weapons I don't know at once into an area? Or let's say I fire this beamer into an area and at the same time I'm throwing a can of squirts into that area to hit 1 monster. Okay, so when you're randomly hitting something with 2 weapons that you don't know anything about, you draw a chit for them, and that chit affects those whatever monsters are being hit by the multiple attacks as it is. And that's all that happens. That chit goes back in the cup then. But normally, the crew is more careful than that, and they shoot or use 1 weapon against 1 monster or 1 group of monsters, check the effect on that, and then that effect will last throughout the rest of the game, regardless of whether it's combined with other weapons or not. So that becomes a known effect, and you can count on it once it's in play. And in general, that's what the crew wants to do. Okay. Electric fence, this is the complicated one. You have to take a full turn to set the thing up and turn it on. And then if a monster enters the space, or a bunch of monsters enters the space, that's when you draw the effect on them. You can't hit somebody with it. You can't shoot it at anybody. They have to walk into it. It can be kind of a disincentive to go into a certain place. But if the monster player doesn't really know what it is, he might want to run into it and see what happens, because he might get a good effect and then be able to keep the crew away from it and keep using it for his own good effect. That's why I almost never set it up as the crew. Fire extinguisher, this may be the coolest of weapons. Well, actually the communication beamer is, but this is one of the next coolest. It allows you to shoot into an adjacent area, and it's an area of effect weapon. Again, though, you probably don't want to hit many monsters with it at once for the first time. You want to find out what it is. Likewise, the gas grenade, which you can chuck at a creature, and it'll affect into an area, and it'll affect everything in the area. By chuck, I mean it's one adjacent area. Now, with these weapons that you throw, if you throw the canister of squirts, or actually just use it, or the gas grenade, or the bottle of acid, what happens is the weapon's used up by being thrown. It doesn't go away permanently, though. It'll get set up back in one of its starting locations. The knife is a little different. The knife works very much like the canister of squirts, except for so you can either hit somebody with it or you can throw it, but it stays where it is, which means if the crew member's holding it when he stabs the monster, he's still holding it afterwards. It's a knife, after all. It's not going to dissolve. It's not like opening up a canister of squirts and pouring it over the monster. On the other hand, if you throw the knife, it stays lying in the area that you threw it into. Hypodermic needle, this is just a hand-to-hand weapon. Pool stick, hand-to-hand weapon. Let's ignore the rocket fuel. Let's play with the rocket fuel. Okay, the rocket fuel. This may be the scariest of all the weapons to play with. So this one has a blast radius. You chuck it into an area. You can chuck it into an adjacent area. You probably don't want to ground zero this thing, actually. And it affects not only that area, but everything adjacent to it that's not blocked by a doorway. Random weapon effect on the monsters, and 5 dice to kill against each crew member it finds in that area. That left something off with the gas grenade. The gas grenade also does something. It does 5 dice to stun to all the crew in that area. And you know what? The gas grenade is just as potent as the rocket fuel in terms of being able to blanket the area. It's just a little less scary to the crew members. I forget about the gas grenade because I don't use it much. It's sometimes hard to get to. You can't start anybody in it. And quite often the monsters are in this area. So usually the rocket fuel gets used more often. That's why I forgot that. Stun pistol over here. This is a single shot, line of sight. You can shoot it down the corridor, but it only hits one monster. That's what I mean by single shot. You get to shoot it multiple times if you like it, but only once each turn. And the welding torch, this is a same area attack. You walk up to the monster and you light him on fire. All right, here are some of the different effects. We get the grow and shrink. Those are kind of interesting ones. Fragmenting. Rules for multiple weapons. Okay, so how do you win? Well, the basic way to win is the crew wipes out the monsters, and the monsters wipe out the crew. There's an alternative, though, which is if the crew doesn't like their chances, they can try to escape, and they can use one of these little one of these little ships, and these each hold a different amount of people. And if they fly out of the Znutar, which is this ship, into space, then they get to play this little mini game on the epilogue and roll dice, and it's kind of like a traveler solo adventure, except much smaller. We're just rolling dice and seeing where you end up. And some of them really are very much like it. You're also able to, when you abandon ship, to set the Znutar to self-destruct. Now, it is conceivable to win the game if you destroy the Znutar, but there's a point victory condition which comes into play, and it's very complicated and not worth explaining, because to tell you the truth, the game is really about can the crew control the ship or not at the end of the game. But there are rules for them to destroy it. If they destroy it, the monsters get 55.5 points, And the crew that escape and make it back, if they make it back through the epilogue story, end up scoring points, I think, equal to, I don't remember. I don't remember how many points they get. I think they get equal to their strength, their constitution. So you could escape with a pretty good amount of crew and take your chances on that right away. This new tar, if it's captured intact by the monsters, is worth 111 points. If it's destroyed, it's worth 55.5. So you probably can't just abandon ship. You have to at least self-destruct. And then if you don't really want to play the whole game, you can just play the epilogue part. All right, so what? I have not been to see the movie Alien. Okay. So what's up with my impression of it before I start playing? This is one of those games that I have never lost in opposed play. But every time I play it solo, the crew wins. So I believe there's a balance issue with this. I also believe that most people, you know, just don't take it seriously enough. So that even when I'm the monsters, they're not really, and I'm not really saying, oh, geez, this is a game you got to take seriously, man. I don't really terribly take it seriously, but I take it seriously enough that I'm trying to optimize my chances, right? But it's a fun, funny game. And, you know, but even within that, I generally played against people who even, you know, are skilled players in general of games, have not been able to beat me in this. I don't know. I haven't really played anybody who claims to be a master at it, though, so I don't know. I don't know if anybody does, except me, of course. But I've seen people claiming that the monsters had the edge. I've heard people say that, and I don't think I've ever played against one of them. It would be an interesting fight. For me, though, the crew seems to be able to control things by being careful with their weapons, making sure they don't do anything risky or too risky. I've seen some games in the balance, though. There's no question. And I'm hoping that this proves me wrong. The simple fact that I've had that happen in a couple of games already. When I played Korean War, I thought that was completely unbalanced in favor of the Americans. And when I videoed it, I had the Americans survive, which sometimes they just don't. Like, if you don't play the Americans right early in the war, or early in the campaign, or whatever, they just collapse. And it would always take me 2 games to realize, you know, the first game I would lose with the Americans, and then the second game I would get the whole war and I would win with them. Well, on video, I ended up playing out the whole war, and the North Koreans won. Totally disproved my statement, because I didn't think that was even possible. And it wasn't tremendous luck either, so I don't know what happened there. And then another one that was similar was La Révolution Française, where I had the historical results kind of happen, which I didn't think was possible. Just an oddness there. I mean, it came much closer to the historical than I've ever seen before. With this one, well, with the magic of video, maybe we will see the crew lose. We'll see.